Evening. We are ready to start the January 12th, 2022 meeting of the Community Formation Commission. Can we start with a call to order from the chair?
Thank you, John. We'll call this meeting to order at 5:34. And if we could do roll call, please.
I'll do roll call. Commissioner Demo Adamalakan. Not present. Commissioner Richard Sander.
Present.
Present. Commissioner Christian Alonso.
Here.
Chair, Vice Chair Anna Zepeda.
Present.
Commissioner Serafina Chavez.
Present.
Commissioner Gabriel Escobedo. Chair Escobedo. Present. Commissioner Louisa Wood.
Present.
Commissioner Kim Johnson.
Present.
Commissioner Rachel Johnson.
Present.
Commissioner Jordan Killebrew.
Present.
Commissioner Lizzie Rodriguez.
Present.
And Commissioner Luis Reynard. So we have a quorum, so we can proceed, Chair. Do we have any public comment that any member of the public wishes to address the commission for up to 3 minutes on something that's not scheduled on the agenda? Sean, do we see any public comment?
I see 2 attendees, but no hands raised at the moment.
Okay, great. So Chair, we'll go on to the next item for your administrative agenda.
Thank you, John. For A, announcements, there are no announcements for tonight's meeting. So that will take us to what is 4B, consideration and action on the draft Community Formation Commission meeting minutes for December 8th, 2021. And I see Lizzie, your hand is up.
Aren't we supposed to do minutes?
That's the item that we're on right now.
Okay, I misunderstood. Sorry.
No problem.
Oh, but I do have a question. I was looking at the minutes and I probably should have done it much sooner than I did. And I noticed that on the minutes, it says roll call vote taken on item number 7, but it doesn't mention what the vote was. And so I think we need to show what it was in order to include the public. And honestly, I don't even remember what it was.
I believe our motion was it is right there at the top of 7 in the bolded, it says table discussion on relationship between review board and auditor monitor until after item 8, and then we just tabled it all together because the meeting got late.
Okay, and is that how you would normally show that to the public? Because in the Fire and Police Commission, it's organized a little differently. So it says, the commission voted on this. And I just want to make sure that we're communicating to the public clearly.
I agree. It does look a little odd. I haven't seen minutes the motion outlined like that. So John, is it possible for us to make that change in the minutes that ultimately get posted on the CFC website?
Yes, Chair Escobedo, we can make that change. Yeah, it was a little bit unusual because we tabled it and then the meeting went on late. We never got back to the item. So we'll reflect exactly what occurred on the meeting minutes. We'll make that change. So with that change, would we have approval of the minutes then?
Yeah, I'll move to approve the amended meeting minutes.
And is there a second?
I'll second it.
So we have a first from Christian, a second from Louisa. Any other discussion? I'm not seeing any. John, can we do a roll call vote, please?
Yes, 1 second. Okay, call it up. Okay, roll call vote to approve the meeting minutes. Commissioner Sander,
Yes.
Commissioner Alonso,
Aye.
Vice Chair Zepeda,
Yes.
Commissioner Chavez,
Yes.
Chair Escobedo,
Yes.
Commissioner Wood,
Yes.
Commissioner Kim Johnson,
Yes.
Commissioner Rachel Johnson,
Yes.
Commissioner Killebrew,
Yes.
Commissioner Rodriguez. And
Lizzie, is your
Commissioner
sound-
Rodriguez.
Yes.
Commissioner Lizzie Rodriguez. Okay, we have a majority. Thank you. Minutes approved.
Thank you. And so we'll close out item 4. We'll move on to item 5, work group updates. Are there, so for this particular item, one of the things that we will be doing is, if the commission approves, is form a focus group, working group that will comprise of members of the survey group, the both drafting groups, so that we can start getting the logistics sorted for our focus groups. We're in the sprint now for us to finish our draft recommendation. I know that Rachel, Louisa, and Lizzie have agreed to be a part of these groups. We selected based on who the head person was for each work group. And there is room for one more person in addition to myself. So right now we have Lizzie, Louisa, Rachel, myself, and there's room for one more. I do ask that if you're a part of this work group, that you make yourself available and are responsive, because the work of this group is going to be very timely if we're going to get all of the work we need to get done before that mid-February date. Is there anyone from the commission that would also like to be a part of the focus working group?
I would like to.
Okay, so Serafina, part of the focus group, is it possible to get a motion to approve this work group?
I'll make that motion.
So a motion from Christian, thank you. And is there a second?
I'll second.
Second from Kim. And John, if we could do a roll call vote, please, to form a focus group work group comprised of Rachel, Serafina, Lizzie, Louisa, and myself.
Absolutely. We'll take a roll call. Commissioner Sander,
Yes.
Commissioner Alonso,
Aye.
Vice Chair Zepeda,
Yes.
Commissioner Chavez,
Yes.
Chair Escobedo,
Yes.
Commissioner Wood,
Yes.
Commissioner Kim Johnson,
Yes.
Commissioner Rachel Johnson,
Yes.
Commissioner Killebrew,
Yes.
Commissioner Rodriguez.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion carries.
Thank you, John. And tonight we're going to be going over a couple of items from the other working groups. So we're going to be going over the focus group list that's going to have categories of stakeholders that we would have those focus groups with. So we're going to discuss that later today. So no need to do an update from the survey working group. We're going to go over the review board element. Oh, Rachel.
Sorry, I just one quick other update from the survey working group, just to close up what the work that we did for the rest of the commission. There's really only one last outstanding item that the working group did, which was to consider and approve the recommendation of CCI to use the SurveyMonkey platform for our platform. So just so everyone's aware, that was kind of the last conversation we had and the last update from that group.
Thank you for that. Yes, Lizzie.
I just want to give appreciation to Rachel for leading that. Did a lot of background work and tried to organize us, cats that are running everywhere. So I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Rachel. Thank you for that, Lizzie. Tonight we're going to be going over the review board element of the recommendation, and that's work from the review board drafting group. So I don't believe that there's an update needed from that work group. But for the auditor monitor drafting group, is there an update on progress?
Yes, so we didn't end up meeting over the holiday. We just took a break, much needed break. But yeah, we're definitely excited to get back to meeting.
Sounds great. Fantastic. I will likely be checking in with you all to see if there's any support that you need following this meeting, but excited to see all the hard work that you've put in. So with that, that closes out item 5, and we can now move on to item 6, which is CFC introduction presentation. So for those out in the public, as a refresher, we as commissioners are connecting with community groups and stakeholders to give a CFC introduction presentation that was approved by the commission to just inform about the process and what to look out for the outreach portion of our endeavor. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Louisa to give us an update.
Good evening, everyone. I don't know if I have access to share my screen, Mr. Dimas. I wonder if that would be something that you could give me access to share. I have a document.
Yes, I will do that right now.
Thank you. Just one second, sorry. Still unable to share my screen. Oh, I'm a co-host. Here we go. Exciting. So quick update on the introduction presentation. So far participating commissioners who have been presenting are Chair Gabe Escobedo, Commissioner Rachel Johnson, Commissioner Lizzie Rodriguez, and myself. Since we started presenting, we have done 11 presentations since September. 8 of those presentations have been to members of law enforcement. 3 have been presentations to community organizations. My cat is being very loud. 4 of the completed presentations have been held since our last meeting, including Standing Together to End Sexual Assault, and also with meetings with members of law enforcement. We have 3 scheduled presentations to be completed in July, including the Independent Living Resource Center, which is, for those of you, Jacob is a part of that, serving individuals with disabilities, and then the Santa Barbara City College President's Cabinet and Santa Barbara City College Planning Council. Moving forward, we have the rest of January to complete CFC introductory presentations. We all know, I know everyone's busy. We have focus group community cafes scheduled to start in February. So this is my push to all of you. We have to get this message out there, and I urge all of you to try to complete 1 presentation by the end of January. Somewhere in the city with an organization, a community, anybody, if you can get out there, that we really need this to be done. I personally, and this is where I'm going to ask the commission to kind of talk about ideas. I'm working on connecting with Santa Barbara Unified School District to find opportunities there to present, which will also help me find members of that community for focus groups, which we're going to talk about in a minute, and to send out the survey link. I'm going to stop share so I can see all of your faces. I'm really pushing you all. Please, if you can get out to present as a part of our commission, we need you. We can send out the link again to sign up for a presentation. We can send out the presentation again and the survey after of who you presented to. So please, I'm calling you all to action. If you can get this done by the end of January, we need this message out so that we can start getting into our focus groups for February. There, I said it. Lizzie, go ahead.
Yeah, so there, I didn't add this to the scheduled yet, but we do have another one scheduled with New Covenant congregation. And then I think Kim was going to work on Pacific Pride Foundation.
Okay.
And I reached out to CLUE, the Clergy Lady United for Economic Justice, and the League of Women Voters. So I'm just waiting to get dates. And I'm requesting that these are all done as public, so that they can invite their, email list, and we can, get this information out as much as possible. Oh, and then the chief and our chair will be doing an interview on the WHIP, which is it's an IG live platform. So that will be recorded, so that could be linkable and sent to other folks as well.
Okay, so let me just, so so those are all great. I see, Rachel, you had some comments as well.
Yeah, I just wanted just to pitch. I mean, I obviously am the one that put the city college meetings on the list, and I'm going to do those with Lizzie, and really looking forward to that. But if people are having a hard time coming up with maybe like where to do these, I think when we get to discussing the focus groups and we start thinking about the stakeholders that we want to really recruit for those, that might give us some ideas of other places we could do introductory meetings leading up to those focus groups, because that's what I'm hoping Lizzie and I convey at the college is like, we want to introduce our work to you, and we also need you as staff people, as students representing specific groups, to like find someone that might want to be on one of the focus groups. So they're definitely really connected.
Thank you. Jordan.
I just want to say thank you for all this hard work and getting us the ball rolling, especially to Louisa, to Lizzie, and Rachel. Great work. I will definitely be jumping in and getting all of my constituents and folks that I know on that list. Please resend that link though. That would be really helpful, and all that information, just because over the holidays, everything kind of just went out the window. So thank you.
Anna.
Yes, and then thank you everybody for elevating, maybe having more of a public outreach on getting more organizations that we aren't like specifically like affiliated with, but maybe like there's other great organizations that are also aligned with or interested in being a part of this. And then definitely also want to continue elevating, having that introductory presentation that's online, having it translated in Spanish now, like before the next meeting, just because, especially since we're going to be like doing more outreach and everything, having that accessible on the website even before, community starts asking us like, why isn't it in Spanish yet? And then I'll be more than happy, but I know there's other folks on here that are really great at like graphics, but if maybe we can have like a graphic of like, hey, if you're interested in having your organization be a part of this, please like go on this link. But like I said, I could do it, but if somebody else is more skilled, that's great too.
Thank you, Anna, for reminding us about the translation. I dropped that ball over the holiday break with my 7 children, so I apologize. I will get that done right away.
Yeah, and I can help too if you need me to help translate. I graduated, so I literally have nothing but time. So I'm more than happy to do that.
Thank you.
Congrats.
Back to you. Christian.
I also just want to thank Vice Chair Zepeda for always holding us accountable on language justice and making sure that the materials produced by this committee are accessible by as many people as possible. And also, I just want to offer, I'll reach out to the Santa Barbara County Action Network, otherwise known as SBCAN, to see if we can get that in by January, and the Santa Barbara Progressive Coalition to see if we can do a presentation to either of those. So I'll follow up with you individually. Louisa, thank you for holding us accountable on this as well.
Yeah, thank you. Just as a reminder for everyone that we're asking that there be at least 2 commissioners at each one. So if you all have great ideas, which sounds like we're moving forward, I'm very excited. I was a little nervous, but I'm excited now. That reach out and we will work to get another commissioner on that presentation with you all. Anyone have anything else they would like to say or add? It's all very nice to see your faces. It's been a month, so I'm done.
Thank you so much, Louisa. I know you've worked really hard in compiling all that information and setting up the process and presentation. It's not lost on us, so thank you so much. John, do we need to open up public comment for this item?
Yes, we do. Sean, do we see anyone with a raised hand?
No, we have 2 attendees. I don't see any raised hands.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you. So we will close out that item and we will move on to the next item, which is item 7, focus group list. The commission will identify categories of stakeholder groups that will be a part of the focus group portion of the outreach strategy. The focus groups are in addition to a larger outreach with the broader community. The CFC may approve the list for the purposes of arranging the logistics for the focus groups. And so with that, I will turn it over to Cami.
Hi, everyone. It's really good to see some of you. I haven't seen some of you since November, since I had missed the last meeting. So it's good to see all of your faces again. I'm going to go ahead and share. Just have to find the right open tab here. Just a moment. Share the document with all of you that the focus group has put together. My apologies. Okay, so just as a reminder, so the focus groups are really a way where you can bring smaller groups of community members together so that you can hear more in depth from some of those stakeholders that you have been talking to already, but also it's an excellent way of reaching members of the community that the traditional survey method might not reach. And it's also a way to kind of drill down on some of the topics that you might be asking in the survey to just get a little bit more information. So when the focus group was putting together this initial list, they were really thinking about who are the people that we need to hear from, we might not otherwise hear from in some cases, and whose voices we'd like to lift up a little bit in this process. So I want to go over some of these, and then absolutely members of the focus group chime in as I go through them if I'm missing some details that you'd like to also add to the conversation. So the first is the category is youth, and as youth we're talking about the 18 to 24 range. Freedom for Youth, Future Leaders of America, SBCC, UCSB. But there also was some thought that there are children, not that they would speak with children, but that it would also be adults who represent children in their work. So SBUC, the Unified School District, storytellers, CASA, and First Five, so that they could represent the issues that children face, particularly when they are with interacting with law enforcement. The next group is law enforcement. And the thought was to consider multiple focus groups here because there have been some thoughts that line officers may want to talk about different things than people who are more command staff. So some of the groups that were talked about were the Police Officers Association, perhaps a separate sergeants, lieutenants, and line officers focus groups. And then also go and look out for, to include school resource officers, maybe someone from state, encampment assignment, patrol officers who live locally versus not locally, those who might be Santa Barbara natives, who might have a very different perspective than some that are not. The next group is people experiencing homelessness, including SB Act, County Development Department, and City Community Development. Also, and I will say there was a great conversation because there are so many nonprofit and social sector partners to include. Where do you start and where do you end? is a lot of that conversation. So, but some of the ones that came up were SBCC Guardian Scholars, Independent Living Resource Center, Just Communities, Cause, Pacific Pride Foundation. Also another focus group for BIPOC advocacy groups like HJSB, MyCop, Cause, FLA, Gateway Education, and then legal co-response partners. So STESA, DVS, MWC, public defenders, legal aid, so that there could really be some people who are talking about, who represent people in the legal system. And then lastly, in this list, business community members. So Downtown Santa Barbara, Chamber of Commerce, Hispanic Chamber, and then also doing some specific recruiting around BIPOC business owners. So this is definitely a starting list. I think that it would also be helpful to kind of give some information about what these would look like once we do convene the community cafes. The current thought is that they would, again, would be smaller groups, that there would be a facilitator for each of those groups. I'm working now to try and find a facilitator for each who has experience in the civilian oversight realm. Most of those people would come from Santa Barbara area, Southern California, and in general, and then the Bay Area. We have a few people who have offered to come down and assist with that as well. These would be, all of them would be asked very similar questions so that we could try to have a good comparison among groups and the answers that they're giving, but also leave some leeway for people to be able to discuss specific issues so that that could be brought to the commission's attention as well. So with that, I think the purpose here is to get some feedback, but I do see Rachel's hand up. Rachel?
Yeah, I just wanted to give a little bit more context to like this list itself, because it wasn't really an official working group like this. I don't know if y'all remember, one of our earliest working groups was community engagement, which one of the lists it produced was like a massive list of nonprofit partners. Then there was the data group that kind of became like the survey working group. So this was something I just sort of helped Gabe and Cami compile from some of those other working groups. And then the working group that we just approved tonight is sort of that the actual working group now that will be kind of doing the work around this. But I just wanted to point out a couple things that came up as we were kind of putting this together, was that there's obviously a lot of gaps, right? Like even the organizations that y'all already mentioned, like faith communities aren't on here. There's like all kinds of things that veterans, specifically like systems impacted or formerly incarcerated individuals, could show up in any number of these, right? So they're really very broad categories with lots of gaps. So the idea was also just kind of how to present as a list to start the discussion around what small groups, because I think CCI, that the survey working group has been, they're going to help provide a facilitator guide, and their recommendation is like 8 to 10 people is a small group number for each of these. And also probably from the facilitator standpoint, limiting ourselves to about 8 to 10 focus groups. So that gives you an idea too of sort of numbers and how big or small these are actually gonna be.
Thank you for clarifying that process, Rachel. Appreciate it. Lizzie?
Would you mind, so are you asking us to look through the list and offer recommendations or suggestions?
Yes.
Okay, would you mind going to the top? I think it was youth. Yes, so I'm wondering if we can include youth that have been formerly incarcerated or currently incarcerated. So that would be Los Puertos Boys Camp, or I don't think we can go into juvenile hall right now. So then maybe AVP, Alternatives to Violence Project, because they work with formerly incarcerated. And then on the other end of the spectrum, maybe SB PALS, which is a youth program under the police department. And then with the service providers, I was thinking folks that represent the foster system because they have a high level of police contact, as well as City College's EOPS department.
Lizzie, can I just ask? So I had EOPS is on there. I forget where I put that. Our Guardian Scholars Program, which is former foster youth. Do you have any other specifically foster youth ones? Because we weren't sure. Like Noah's Anchorage, I think, is CARP based, but yeah, I was trying to think of others.
The county has well, I know the city has a special, like specific foster program and then they have mentors and so forth, but the county has like a foster support group. So we can go through them. And then I was wondering, AHA, because they're kind of seen as like peace leaders on campus. So that might be some either as youth or as the service providers or youth support people.
Lizzie, maybe you know, is Y Strive still active? No. Okay.
No, unfortunately, they're not. There is a day program that's offered through the probation department, and that's for folks who are recently released from jail. And it's kind of like the next step program. So we might be able to contact them.
There's also, thank you. There's also, oh, sorry, I'll let you finish and then I'll add some. I have a bunch of nonprofits.
And then my last was, as Rachel mentioned, the faith communities, CLUE, and the League of Women Voters in particular have been very active in criminal justice reform and oversight in the jail. So I think that they would have a good feedback for us.
Thank you for that, Lizzie. Jordan?
Come back to me. I'm getting my list all organized.
Okay. Louisa?
Are we moving on to the children? Because are we just kind of talking as we go? For the children's section, I would say Tri-Counties Regional Center could be a good source. They have a lot of individuals experiencing living with disabilities, identified as having disabilities. Also CALM could be a really good organization. And then Casa Pacifica, I know that they're based in down south, but we also have them up here in our schools. So that could be a good connection.
Thanks, Louisa.
I'm sorry, one more, behavioral wellness. I know, I'm not sure if that was going on here as well.
Okay. Anyone else with suggestions? Rich?
I would like to add under people experiencing homelessness, New Beginnings Counseling Center. They focus on vehicular homelessness. And I don't know if it was listed, but PATH or the Santa Barbara Rescue Mission are shelter agencies that have access to a lot of people experiencing homelessness.
Is Transition House also on that list?
Transition House could be great. Those deal with families experiencing homelessness.
Okay.
Yeah, I also realized we sort of set Cami up a bit with using so many acronyms from our community that she might not know.
As
So
I was reading them, I was like, I remember saying whole names. I don't remember
so like
the acronyms.
a lot of the mental health stuff. I think the heading was like in co-response, or like kind of we were trying to group out partners. So that's where like mental wellness center, and I think a lot of the ones y'all mentioned could be combined into yeah, the co-response partners down there. But yes, look at all those acronyms we gave her. Sorry about that.
So many.
I know some of them.
Just thinking about the environmental advocacy world. I don't know if that would be an important piece, but Santa Barbara Channel Keeper could be a good nonprofit to connect with.
I would also add to that, Community Environmental Council would be exceptional. They have a very large reach and base.
And the EDC would be another one too.
Environmental
Defense Center.
And the first one you said, Louisa, was Channel Keeper?
Santa Barbara Channel Keeper, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Demo?
Thank you. As a legal partner, I was going to suggest also Santa Barbara College of Law, because I have a lot of classmates who are very excited about this.
Great.
We'd love to schedule a presentation there, Demo.
I'll be up for that. Yeah.
Rich?
Yeah, with the legal co-response partners, I was thinking more of the immigrant community. And so we have the Immigrant Legal Defense Center as well as Immigrant Hope.
Okay. Thank you for that, Rich. Jordan?
I was also thinking on behavioral health issues, perhaps reaching out to Council on Alcoholism and Drug Abuse. That might be of benefit. Looking at families, Family Service Agency could be a good group to reach out to. Who else? I'm wondering if also the food bank could be a good place to reach out to, just because they also reach such a broad swath of people. And that's all I have for now. I'm sure I have more. Sorry.
Thanks, Jordan.
I'm curious if anyone from SBPD are we missing anybody or any groups that you have frequent contact with?
Great question.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Commissioner Rodriguez. You're covering a large amount of organizations that we work with on a daily basis, so I really appreciate that. I would also add potentially the community engagement team with the South Coast Youth Safety Partnership, excuse me, because that partnership encompasses a very large amount of different organizations together, so that might be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other thoughts, suggestions? Okay, well, thank you for this. We'll update the list and we will send it on to the new group and go from there. So thanks everyone for your input. I appreciate it. This is incredibly helpful.
Thank you so much. John, if we could open up public comment.
Sure, open up public comment on this item. Sean, is there any person in attendance raising their hand wishing to speak to the commission for 3 minutes?
There are no hands raised.
Okay. Chair Escobedo can proceed to the next item.
All right. So with that, we will close out this item and we will move on to item 8, which is discussion and review of draft language for the oversight model. The National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement, NACOL, will facilitate a discussion with the Community Formation Commission to discuss and review the draft recommendation for the review board portion of the oversight model. The CFC may take action on approving part or all of the language for the purposes of later making a recommendation to the City Council. And I'll turn it back over to you, Cami.
Thank you. So with the help of Gabe, we have formalized this document a little bit, and the working group as a whole have formalized this document a little bit since the last time you saw it. And I want to bring it up here quickly. I apologize. Every time I go to share it, it disappears. Okay, here we go. So some things that I'm sure all of you have had a moment to look through this and digest it a bit. There is an introduction that has been added, as well as more information about who the members are, who are the partners in this process, and a definition of some information from our recent report, just definition on civilian oversight, so that anybody reading it could pick it up and have at least a basic understanding of what civilian oversight is. So once we go through all of that, some of this you have all seen already. It is the things that you see in this document today, like the overall recommendation, the purpose statement. Those are all things that you have seen before, just in a much nicer format. And so what I would like to do is, if everyone is in agreement, is to move past kind of the definition of review element, move into the beginning of the meat of this with the purpose. Now, the purpose is something all of you have already talked about. And so, but I want to give, since my hope is that we can get through the review portion in its entirety, I want to give pause at each section so that if there are things that people would like to contribute, that we can get that information noted now, so that we can then move forward. I think it would be great if you could feel like you have a solid review board recommendation at the end of this, knowing that there's a survey process and focus groups that may bring you information that may change this later, but that at least you are one step closer to having a recommendation. So with that said, let's start with the purpose statement. And I won't linger. Okay, great. So the next section here is the composition, qualifications, and disqualifications from membership. This is one that we've also, well, you as a group have gone through, discussed at length. I don't believe that there is anything different in here. I'm just looking down. No, there is nothing different in here than the last time that you all reviewed this section. But Louisa?
I think there's just one part talking about on page 5. Let's see, I just find it. Second paragraph. We have the word youth, the second sentence, youth and those with lived experience. We had a long discussion about what we define as youth. And I believe we agreed to 18 to 23 or something, or 24. Did you guys find that? Oh, I'm sorry. Did I say page 5? I meant page 6. I apologize. Okay. Page 6.
All of a sudden I was like, am I looking?
I know you were looking around. Sorry, page 6, second paragraph, youth. I just wanted to make sure that that was kind of clearly defined, that it's what we mean by youth. And we may need to go back to the language that we agreed to. I can't remember exactly what it said, but.
Okay.
I believe it was 18 to 24. That's how we defined it in the focus group list as well.
Okay, for the purposes of this discussion, I'm just going to put in a note here to let us kind of shore that up, unless anybody has any any issues with that. I think that that's a great point, Louisa. Thank you.
Just to help the commission, a lot of the charter commissions have a requirement of qualifications, and you must be elector of the city, meaning over 18, the ability to vote, and a resident of the city. So, you know, I'm not talking so much about the resident portion. I'm just talking about at least over 18. So that's important. I just want to let you know that's in line with all our other commissions, at least over the age of 18, because that's being eligible to vote. So at that age.
Thank you, John. And thank you, Louisa. Lizzie?
Yes, I just want to make sure that we clarified the collaboration part, because I remember there was conversation around what that meant, and it was not any person who's collaborated with SBPD, but working in law enforcement that collaborated with SBPD, because there's a lot of community groups and individuals who currently collaborate, either present or at briefings or, you know, things like that. So we had a pretty lengthy discussion about what collaborative meant in this context.
Okay. And can you point, Lizzie, to where in here you're specifically talking about, or are you just talking in general?
I can't see this document in my Google Drive, so
Okay.
I haven't seen this particular document.
Okay, I'll make a note of that.
Was this particular document sent out? Because the last draft recommendations are from December 22nd.
I sent out an email to the full commission with a PDF version of the review element along with the focus group list. And that was sent, I believe, last Thursday or Friday. I can send it again.
I'm just looking at the document right now, and the word collaboration doesn't appear on the qualifications section,
Okay.
if that addresses your concern, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else, Lizzie? Oh, I'm gonna no. Dave?
Thank you. I was just going to make a suggestion if the commission is okay with it. I think it would be helpful, at least for me, since we have text now, and we're going to be talking about it in wordsmithing, if we could, just as John jumped in to provide us some insight, if we could get feedback from staff just on quick thoughts, John for legal and Sean for his perspective on particular sections, in case we're missing anything. I think now is a good time for us to get that feedback, if everyone feels okay with that as we go through the document.
It's a great point.
Thank you, Gabe.
Chair Escobedo, can I confirm what you're asking? Do you just want general points in this section, or does the commission plan to go item by item?
I believe, and Kenny, correct me if I'm wrong, we're going to go section by section. So for each section, after commissioner comments, if there are things that we have missed or if there are concerns that you have, I think it would be appropriate for you to bring those up for the commission.
Understood. And for efficiency, Cami, if you just want to address me when the commission has finished its comments in the section, that's great.
Absolutely. So are there any other commissioner comments for this section? Sean, I'll send it to you then, if you have any additional thoughts or comments. Or you, John, as well.
Thank you. I can start. I would like to just start by acknowledging the work that was done to put this together, and I really appreciate the work of the commission as a team working on this. So I definitely appreciate that, just to start with. From a department standpoint, I think that although this has been discussed thoroughly by the commission, if you're asking for the department's perspective, the item regarding having never been worked as a sworn law enforcement would probably be something that we would agree to the extent that nobody from the Santa Barbara Police Department, maybe even perhaps Santa Barbara County. But I do think if we're talking about lived experiences is making this a productive group, there might be room, just as there was in the current commission, to having law enforcement perhaps from another state or outside the area or retired long ago or something like that, that can provide some helpful information for lived experiences. So from our perspective, certainly we agree and understand the idea of no Santa Barbara police or former Santa Barbara police, but perhaps there's some room to consider long retired outside of the area who might be beneficial when talking about lived experience. And again, I appreciate the space in this conversation, so I'll just keep going if that's okay.
Please.
I think also relevant to this, and again, thanks for the space. When we're talking about any family members, that conversation, and I know it was discussed at length, and I really appreciate the consideration the commission put into it. But I think that that's much more restrictive, the language in here, than many other cities that this some kind of models, and that at least I've reviewed, and I know a lot of the commission have reviewed. This is quite restrictive, and there may be some other language that might leave a little bit of room for example, a child of a former retired law enforcement who is doing work in the legal realm or something like that. So I think this is quite restrictive when we're discussing any family members whatsoever, and perhaps there could be consideration for space in that conversation. And again, I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Sean. Chief, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. And Sean stated the department's concerns on membership very well, and I do hope you'll give that some thought. I was going to ask, in looking at some of the other cities that have this work, I'm kind of going back to the purpose statement for a second. There was fairly strong language that the purpose of the review board was to foster or improve or enhance, pick your word, relationships between the police and the community. And I think adding that to the purpose statement would be particularly helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
If I may add, so right now we're focusing on section B, the composition qualifications, and is that the section we're working on, Cami?
Yes.
My main comment, we already talked about the electors, at least having someone over the age of 18. The other part is the confidentiality agreement for leaking stuff in closed sessions. That's unusual. I don't think it's necessary. There's options to punish leakers in the Brown Act under Government Code Section 54963. And it states in there, reading from it, a person may not disclose confidential information that has been acquired by being present in a closed session to a person not entitled to receive it, unless the legislative body, be the commission in this case, authorizes disclosure of that confidential information. Now, a violation of that could be addressed in 3 ways: injunctive relief to prevent disclosure, disciplinary action if it's an employee who did that, so I know it wouldn't really handle the commissioners, or referral of a member of a legislative body who has willfully disclosed that information to the grand jury. That last one, C, this has been enacted, the section, since 1943. To my knowledge, no one's been prosecuted by it, but there already is a provision to prevent leaking it. And I don't know what the confidential, agreement would do in terms of it being punitive. So I would just rely upon the law that's already in place on that at that point, and not add anything in addition to that, because it's unusual and there's already a law in place that prevents it.
Can we navigate to the section that we're discussing so that the public can see on the screen what section we're talking about, please?
It's up.
Okay, thank you.
Section 3.
Sorry,
Yeah.
sorry, I missed it.
No, that's okay. I moved quickly. Okay, sorry, John, go ahead.
So just like, it would be, so the agreement itself would be hard to enforce. It'd be unusual, what consideration is there. And my other point is that there is a Brown Act code section that makes it illegal to basically leak anything from a closed session. So there is that. And depending on how bad and willful a leak is, if there's it could be referred to the grand jury if we would want to. But that's something we can do in training for this commission and make them aware, because they are going to be dealing with sensitive information, the legality and how it's illegal, and pointing out that code section already in place.
Thank you for that, John. Rachel?
Yeah, thanks, Cami. I just, for this section, because I know, this was a particularly difficult section when we all discussed it. And I just kind of wanted to, remind us all, first of all, that, this is still very much a draft. And just to address some of Sean's concerns too. This is a great example of exactly the kinds of things we want to capture in the community feedback survey and in the focus groups, right? Like this is, it's great here that at the commission meeting, we have city staff and representatives. But I also want to encourage you, Sean, and your colleagues, right? That's the kind of stuff that we're going to be specifically asking about, and why this draft is going to go out to the community, so that we don't, we're not just including things because they've been included in other cities, but so that we're really figuring out if these things are right for the Santa Barbara community. And I think, one of the reasons why this section was difficult is we've all had to consider, what this means for, whether or not we personally would be allowed to be on this particular oversight body if we wanted to, and things like that. So I think this is an interesting exercise in what we're all doing here to discuss this draft, but also remembering that we're all constituents, and that's exactly the kind of feedback from law enforcement that we want to get, and also want to get from other constituency groups that haven't yet had that opportunity, right? Like this draft is going to go out now to other community stakeholders as well. So, these kinds of discussions are just really useful, I guess, as we're also still thinking about how to flesh out those focus groups and how we can get the most out of this survey too. So yeah, and just appreciating the comments and the feedback, and that, these are exactly why we're going to push this out for sort of more input as we go forward.
Thank you for that, Rachel. And that also makes me think that just for those watching this or the recorded version, is that when my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, Gabe, is that once this discussion is done, corrections will be made to reflect, and this version will not go out. The approved draft from the commission after all of these discussions will go out. So for those who are watching this, just know that this is still a living document. This is not the final draft that will be going out, just in case anybody has that question going forward. Are there any other comments on section B? Okay, seeing none, I will move us on to section C, the appointment of terms and members. So this is also a section that we have discussed. There were some additions to this section, and those are all highlighted here. And so since you all have a copy of this, I don't want to read it to all of you, but I would like to open up discussion specific to, since this is new language that you have not previously discussed, to be able to comment on it. Lizzie?
So I'm just wondering, it's semantics, but it just kind of sets a tone, I think. Instead of the Santa Barbara can use, maybe shall use, and then instead of but, maybe just make it more active, like the city of Santa Barbara shall use the city's current appointment process for boards and commission while ensuring that members be broadly reflective. That way it just is less like, you know.
Lizzie, I'm sorry, I was trying to remove everyone's face so I could see the document. Was there a second, besides the change from the first can to shall, was there another suggested change?
The city of Santa Barbara shall use the city's current appointment process for boards and commission, ensuring that members be broadly reflective of race and so forth.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. Any other comments?
My Cami and Commission, my one comment is a logistical issue that I spot in terms of where it says under Roman number 2, board members shall serve a maximum of 2 consecutive terms. So when a term is up, it's up to the council to approve a second term. So it can't be an automatic thing, especially from the beginning. We're talking about that we're going to use the normal process. So I have no problem in terms of, at least logistically, pointing out to the commission. You can have you can reserve, if it's a 7 or 11 member commission, whatever, you can reserve 3 commissioner spots for like a 6 term or 4 year, then 2 for a 2 year. That's not a problem. The issue is just all of a sudden mandating a consecutive term, especially if we're going to follow the process, because once a term ends, they still have to be approved and it still has to go through council approval process. And so it can't be an automatic consecutive term, if we're going to go through that process. So that's one logistical issue that I see.
Thank you. Gabe?
I just want to make sure I'm understanding correctly. So the issue with that part is the word shall, because it's basically saying they can serve a maximum of 2 terms, 2 consecutive terms.
So I guess that's, yeah, because I read at the end, that part's fine, having a term limit. I guess in the beginning where you see Commissioner Escobedo, board members shall serve a maximum of 2 consecutive terms to ensure. As long as it's not, if the way I read it was that there is like a mandate for it. So if it's meant to read, and maybe if I'm misreading it, that's great for pointing it out to me. I apologize. That maybe it is the word shall, is that it's not guaranteed to have a second term. It's just they have a term limit of 2 terms. Is that what the commission wants, just to have a 2-term limit on this issue?
Yeah, two
Okay.
consecutive. But I think if we change shall to can, it might solve the issue.
Got it. Yes, it would.
Okay.
So or maybe like appointed board members may be appointed a maximum of 2 terms. So that's one way to clarify. But also, did we vote on that? Are we certain that that's what we want? Because I know that the current council does a really good job of making sure that they don't appoint somebody twice unless nobody applies. And we've had commissions where a person has served 3 or 4 times because they didn't get people applying. And so I don't want to kind of cut us short on that. And thinking about the terms, we talked about having like a 1-year term, a 2-year term, a 3-year term, at least at the beginning, to sort of space that out. And if we had one person who served 1 year and then they want, it just, so I wonder if maybe if we were going to put a limit, do we want to put a limit of years versus terms? And then the next question is, do we really want to limit the terms?
Thank you, Lizzie. Gabe?
I would suggest that we avoid using years because it becomes a lot to keep track of. And then the intention of having the staggered terms to start is so that we have staggered vacancies. And if we use years, it might throw up that staggered nature and the intention in that. I think if we're going to, maybe we either increase the number of consecutive terms, because that might be helpful for that person that serves that 1-year term. Maybe it's 3 so that they can potentially serve 2 full terms following that first year. But those are just some of the thoughts that I had.
Thank you, Gabe. Christian?
I agree with Commissioner Rodriguez. I'm not sure that term limits would necessarily be the best fit for an 11-person board. Maybe if it was a smaller board, but 11 people is a lot. And I don't know if any of you have like gotten the chance to check out the appointment process at the city and seen some of these boards like try to be staffed year over year. And a lot of times the board, like, there are many boards that just go unstaffed because they can't find people. And if we're, having the civilian oversight board not staffed because of term limits, I think that would be a horrible disservice to the community. And I think that at least in the initial rollout of the board, we should be a little bit more flexible on term limits.
Maybe we can also add like if all like outreach has been exhausted to try to find new people to apply, then like they can reapply, if they've already reached like whatever that cap is, but ensuring that like all efforts to like try to find new people to come into the board has been exhausted first. Like people were aware that there was like, applications were being accepted, like there was outreach, there was like actual effort being made and people still didn't apply, then okay, I don't know if hopefully that made sense.
One thing that cities often consider, because filling vacancies is an issue for every board, whether it's an oversight board or not, and oversight boards kind of ebb and flow with community interest. But one thing to consider is, do you want people to be on the board for 9 or 12 years potentially? And what that looks like as far as the overall composition of the board. That's a question. That's not, it's just another way to look at it, I think.
Our current council, I think they do a good job of saying, after their second term, they really question if that third term should be, if they should fill that third term. And right now the CFs, the oversight body is, it's interesting to people. They want to be part of it, but I I don't know that that's, if we're going to have a lot of applicants, let's say 5-10 years from now. And I'm concerned, as Christian mentioned, that, seats are left empty. Look at the list right now, and there's lots of vacancies. On the Fire and Police Commission, there were vacancies. On the civilian, or what is it called? The commission that oversees personnel issues once they've been challenged. So that's sat empty for some time. So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Are there any other thoughts on this? Are there more people that agree with it? Other people that feel that it should be left as is? And I've only heard from a few. Serafina?
I was thinking a very similar thing to Lizzie. I do think that, at least right now, the city council has a pretty good discretion of saying, like, what do you really have to offer if you're going for a 3rd term limit? And again, like, everybody has to reapply once their term limit ends, at least from my understanding at the moment, and go through that process and reapply, and so that makes me feel better in a way where it's like, it's not just going to be, you reapply and you automatically get in. You're still going to have to go through some screening process through city council. And I, at the moment, feel comfortable letting city council, use their discretion and say, okay, yep, that's totally fine. Thank you for serving. You're welcome to do your 3rd term limit now. But yeah, so I think it's definitely realistic to think about, if we're going to have people to still staff this in, 10, 20 years down the road. So I think that's a really good point. Lizzie, thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you, Serafina. Any other comments on this? So from those who have spoken, I'm hearing a lot of a fairly strong argument for changing this current language. Is there anyone that disagrees with that has not spoken?
I'll just say, yeah, I just thought it could be just 3 consecutive terms, just to have, in case there's shortages, just to have a little more leeway. And then I still think there should be terms, at least consecutively. So that was just my thought, but I'm fine with, at the end of the day, I think there's reasonable arguments for both sides. So
thank you. Rich?
I'm wondering that if these are just consecutive terms, not saying that people can't leave for a while and come back. And I'm still having a hard time with, I more think that people could get on and just stay on because of legacy, and people just approve it through things, and I'd hate to see it. I'd hate to see the board kind of just become going through the motions, I guess. And so I think 2 consecutive terms could be still, I think that's a lot of time still, just to have like some time off. And I think it's just a healthy practice, but that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you, Rich. Rachel?
Yes, I agree. I think, nonprofit boards, if anything, I think term limits are healthy. I just wanted to clarify, though, in case I missed this, and I apologize. I feel like I zoned out for a second there. That the initial creation, so there'd be 4 members with that 3-year term to put in place the staggering. So when they are up for a re-up, is their 2nd and potentially 3rd term also 3 years, or do they just go to 2 years then?
It would be, as it is written now, it would be 3 years. Their 2nd term would be a full 3 years.
So those 4 people who initially got the 3 years, they get to keep having an additional 3 added, rather than first time it's 3 and then 2 and 2.
Correct.
Okay. So there'd be 4 people who would get 9 years, but then after that point, there would be no one that would ever serve that long anymore, even if we went to 3 2-year terms. 6 would be the limit after that initial cohort.
Well, if you change it to 3 consecutive terms, after the first 9 years, anybody who is appointed in that second round
Would
could
be the 2 years.
potentially, yeah, if there were new people to the board that weren't on the initial appointment structure. So there are, I mean, if it's 3 consecutive terms, you're eventually going to get people who are 9 years.
Beyond that first cohort, I think that's what I'm having a hard time understanding. Like the way this is written to me looks like it's only those 4 people getting an initial 3-year term that would ever have the potential to serve 9.
I think there's some confusion about that first paragraph because it's a full term is 3 years. It's the alternates that have a 2-year term.
Okay, sorry. So that was my misunderstanding. Okay, so there is still a potential for everybody to be there that long. Yeah, I mean, I don't know that yeah, 9 years does seem like a really long time. Like for just my experience on a nonprofit board, that's a bit too long, but I don't know. I mean, if I'm in the minority of this, because I've never, a commission like this, I recognize is very different than a nonprofit board. And so term limits, you know, might not play out the same way, but.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. It's also a board that requires a lot of prep work and community outreach. So it's not just attending a meeting once a month either. So there's that. I think Chair, would you be fine with taking a straw poll on this so that we can move past or beyond this section? Because I do think that this is an important thing for us to have a clear understanding.
Yeah, I think that would be appropriate. Do we want to change? It sounds like no one's advocating for keeping the 2 consecutive terms. Do we want the straw poll to reflect 3 consecutive terms? If anyone objects.
Or are we choosing between 2 and 3? Do you want us to just vote yes or no to a particular number or vote 2 or 3?
I think that's what I'm hearing, Rachel, is that there are some that do favor leaving it at 2 and some who would like to see it expanded.
So let's do a straw poll then. And if you favor, let's say 3 consecutive terms, raise your hand now. Raise your virtual hand if you can.
Okay, that's 5 hands. Okay.
How many people do we have here? How many commissioners?
I believe 10, Chair.
We have 10 commissioners here.
Well, are we now raising our hands if we're in favor of 2, or are we just not voting on that?
I think it was the people who didn't vote that we assumed that you would be in favor of 2.
Is that a fair assumption to everyone who didn't vote then? I feel like we should just go ahead and do
Let's
that.
just have the vote.
Yeah, let's not
Fair enough.
assume what people
Fair
vote.
enough. Fair enough. So if you are in favor of 2 consecutive terms, raise your hand.
Virtually.
Virtually. We're at 5 again.
I think Kim was, or Kim, were you looking for, Kim had her real hand, but I think she might be looking for her virtual hand. Just
Okay, so it looks like a leaving it with Kim's vote, leaving it at 2. Okay, thank you, everyone.
we may also get community feedback on this.
Right.
Right? Like
Exactly.
this is not a for
Exactly.
sure. That's a straw
And
poll.
we will keep these comments so that as we continue to move forward, we know the discussion and the thought process. Okay, so as a reminder, we are still in the appointment and terms of members section. I just want to see if there's any other comments about this section. Jordan?
Sorry, I forgot to take my hand down. Sorry.
No worries. I also wanted to, if there aren't any additional commissioner comments, I want to invite Sean and John for any other comments they might have.
No comments from Sean. Thank you.
None for John either. I needed clarification, and Chair Escobedo helped me with that. So that was it.
Great. Thank you. Okay, we will then move on to the next section, training. And so although this has been discussed quite a bit, and I apologize, this was this discussed in the December meeting? I can't remember.
It was not. It was
Okay.
mostly discussion about the relationship, and I forget one other thing.
Okay, perfect. So this has been discussed quite a bit in the working group. But this is our first section where it has not been fully vetted by the full commission. So I'm gonna kind of slow down and go subsection by subsection so that we can make sure that we hear everybody's comments. And then, of course, we can go back and revisit some of them if something comes up as part of another discussion. So Section 1 is really just about that it is a collaboration of the Director of Police Oversight, the monitor, with input from the police department, the oversight board, and shall establish training criteria annually that will allow the oversight agency to carry out its oversight duties. Any issues there? Okay, then let's get to where I think, oh, Rich, please.
So this is going to bleed into the next comment, but it goes along with this. If you could scroll up just a little bit, it says the criteria annually. And I was thinking that in reviewing this, these are covering a wide and large range of topics. And I can't imagine one annual training covering all of this stuff. So I would imagine it would be a lot of different trainings throughout the year or what have you. I'm wondering if we could, and this is what my understanding with the auditor monitor function, if there was something that, could we tie training specific to circumstances that need oversight on? So if there is something that's involving sexual harassment, could we mandate training that happens, or that some people on the commission go through sexual harassment training prior to that kind of oversight, so that it's tied to the oversight actions, not just that people are, I'm concerned that this is so much training that I don't know who would have time to go through it all. I don't want to burn people out on the commission, but I don't know how to say that, and I don't know, that's just my input, but thank you.
Thank you, Rich, for the input. Gabe?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to provide some clarification, because maybe we could phrase it so that it comes across a little bit better. But the idea behind this was that the oversight board, with help from the auditor monitor, would establish what their training would look like for that year annually, if that makes sense. It wouldn't just take place once a year. It would just be, they would come together to decide what that training could look like. So it could potentially be, Rich, something like how you outlined, and maybe we can come up with some language for that, where maybe there's some specific circumstances that the board needs some training support on that'll help them in their work. And they can provide that input at least once a year when they're designing what the training is going to look like.
Rachel?
Thank you for that, Gabe. That was how I read that sentence as well. So that was actually one of the things I wanted to clarify, was that it's the oversight board at least once a year will look at its training and evaluate specifically related to, yeah, like what has come up for them in the past year, or what's relevant. And I'm just thinking maybe just like language suggestion, if then on the second point we just put something to the effect of like obviously these are all things that we recommend training include, but say something like may include, but is not limited to, right? Like leave that door open for any number of other kinds of training that the actual board, deems necessary for them at the time. Because I'm sure there's lots of things we have not thought of that might come up 5 years from now. So.
Thank you, Rachel. And then just because Rich, you make a really important point. It's a lot of training. And I just want to say that, so typically civilian oversight boards receive 20 to 30 hours of training a year. In addition, and that's just on police policy and procedure and civilian oversight basics. That's in addition to ride-alongs, any kind of ethics or board training, sexual harassment, like all of the extras. And so it is a lot. There's a huge learning curve. And because most of the people who will come and serve on a civilian oversight board, although they know a lot about their community, they may not know a lot about policing and civilian oversight. And so it's an effort to train them so that they are adequately equipped for any of the things that they will have to do. So I just wanted to add that as kind of the basic philosophy behind training, and understand that it's a lot. Lizzie?
This might just be semantical, but I'm wondering in 10 use of force practices, if we could do use of force / de-escalation practices, because there's quite a bit of de-escalation that occurs before use of force is administered. And I think oftentimes we don't think about that part, and that's so important. So when we hear about a use of force, we want to understand that there have been steps that were taken before that was applied.
Thank you, Lucy. Christian?
I just want to reiterate and echo that, it is a lot of training. I think that this is a board that is unlike some of the other, commissions and boards that currently operate at the city, and that we want members of this board, like Cami was explaining, to be adequately trained to review the types of cases that will come before it. So I think that I just want to echo that it's a lot of training, but I can't think of a single thing on this list particularly that I would take off.
Thank you, Christian. Lizzie?
Yeah, and then this is my last for this section at least. If we can add NACOL membership, and so setting aside portion of the budget for NACOL membership in addition to the training events, and then in the section of training, add in NACOL webinars. Those have been really, really informative.
Thank you, Lizzie. Rachel.
Yeah, I don't feel like I have a particular sentence to suggest, but maybe like in number 1 there. So it shall establish training criteria annually to carry out its oversight duties. Maybe just like an additional sentence or something there that indicates that some of this training is mandatory, like obviously ethics training sexual harassment when you're part of a group that's right. Like some of this is just going to be mandatory as like an onboarding for any commissioner. So I don't know if there's a way for maybe in that introductory section to sort of indicate that there will be an ongoing mix of mandatory and voluntary, or mandatory and kind of elective training, I guess, that would be determined by each annual cohort of commissioners. Maybe that's it's like registering for school. There's mandatory classes and electives.
Your core competencies.
Right.
Thank you, Rachel. Gabe?
I don't, this is not going to be extremely helpful, but I don't have verbiage suggestions, but looking at this again, number 6 in the second section, the ride-alongs and walk-alongs and practical experience, where the wherever possible just sounds awkward and kind of makes it sound like it wouldn't be part of the training. So I don't know if anyone has any suggestions, but that part of that criteria just seems a little awkward. I think we can make it sound a little bit better.
Thanks, Gabe. Rachel?
Yeah, I was curious about that line as well, just because I was wondering if like wherever possible was like, obviously because of COVID, it hasn't like been possible for us. I know that that was something that was offered to us as commissioners on this, and we haven't been able to do it. So, I mean, I guess this is kind of one of those sections where, and maybe Cammie, you can help us with this, like what's the balance between being really specific and open-ended enough where like the future oversight body understands the well, actually, and the city council when they're thinking about accepting these recommendations, that we get the idea behind these recommendations, right? Like, so this particular line is like, you know, whenever or wherever possible, commissioners, you know, should have at least the option, you know, to have practical experiences with law enforcement. And that could probably look a lot of different ways. So I feel like how do we convey that that's the intent behind this list, right? Is to provide a menu of options without being too specific and saying you have to do all of this in a given year.
So just to jump in, Rachel, you asked about how specific. So, you know, I think you don't want to be so specific that there is no wiggle room as council is approving. And so that it then becomes, well, if we can't give them exactly what they want, then we just won't give it to them. So, but I do think you have to be specific enough so that people understand what you're talking about, even if they haven't been involved in the process. So I do think that I agree that that practical experience, where I think wherever possible, is also a little problematic, because you don't really know, what does that mean? And also, when you say practical experience, maybe some more specificity as to what you actually are talking about there, like in this case. So yeah, because I think this is a really important part of training. So
I mean, Sean has offered us a couple of things. I mean, again, wherever possible, COVID has changed pretty much everything that Sean has offered us. Like visiting the training facility in Ventura, going to the physical fitness testing day, things like that, right? I mean, those are very specific, and what I think of when I see practical experience, or they'd all be components of that. But I don't know. I mean, maybe that's something. I don't know if Sean, you want to suggest any? Is there broader language there, or different language that would encompass all of those options in a way that isn't too specific?
Sure. Thank you for that space. I would say, I mean, I can offer some language that I think of when it comes to this, and it would generally be that ride-alongs are generally required. And I think that leaves a little bit of wiggle room for unanticipated circumstances. But I should say, since I'm speaking at this moment, that it is the department's positions that ride-along should generally be required annually. And I know that that was a long and difficult conversation for the commission, which I really appreciate the time that everyone took in that conversation. But I do believe it's a best practice. I think that NACOL also supports that concept. And I think that when there are circumstances that are sensitive between of a commissioner, I think that the department can accommodate some interpersonal relationship development prior to doing a ride along. So for example, a commissioner on this commission has a very specific job to do. So if there were some barriers to do a ride along, we could probably offer some meet and greets, coffee shop conversations with a particular officer so that there's a little bit of a relationship built just before you jump in a police car with somebody that you don't know, because I can understand that might be startling for some. So it is our department's position that they should generally be required annually. I think that generally leaves a little bit of wiggle room for unanticipated events. And we will definitely accommodate for sensitivities that might come along with that.
Thank you, Sean. Rich?
Yeah, so I hate to continue to bring this up, but I am really concerned just about, I mean, we're still at the beginning of this, and I am concerned about what we're asking from commissioners. We went through a lot of discussion about wanting to have so many different groups and people on this commission, and a lot of those were from marginalized communities. And when you're in such a community, you're often working 2 jobs, you're below the poverty line sometimes, there's a lot of different life factors that are there. And I mean, I'm still overwhelmed with the amount of training. And I hear you that we want people properly trained that are making judgments on this stuff. But I think that we have to balance that somehow on what is required and what could be, maybe other members of the commission can take some of those duties off of everyone. It just feels very, I'm very concerned that we're setting up commissioners to fail with so much that they need to accomplish to be on this commission. And I don't know if this is the time to address that or just something that we want to have in the back of our mind as we continue to go through this process, but that's my main concern.
Thank you, Rich. Gabe?
I want to share my perspective on that, and I appreciate you bringing that up, Rich. It does seem like a lot when you're looking at a long list like this, but a lot of this stuff is critical for this review board to carry out its duties. And I think one of the key pieces of this portion is the fact that those same commissioners or review board members would have input into what their training would look like. And I think that's a really important piece, because then they can really focus it on what are the critical items, and they get that input so that they're not being overwhelmed with trainings that they may deem unnecessary to actually do the duties of the job. But that's just my 2 cents.
Thank you for that, Gabe. Anybody else?
Yeah, just out of curiosity, Rich, I just wanted to ask, what would be like the ideal, what would the ideal training amount look like for you? Just so I can, out of curiosity.
I don't think that I have like an ideal training amount. Like I want us to balance it. Like I definitely think trainings are going to be, trainings are going to be part of it, but there's also going to be actual review process, and there's going to be meeting together and discussing what other accountability process. Like this is only one part of all of the aspects of being on a commission, and I just want us to be cognizant of how much time we're requesting of commissioners, or how much what exactly we're asking them to do. And so like if ride-alongs were one of those things that were one of those things that we would say is a necessity, then I would love to see like, these are the bare minimums kind of trainings, and here's everything that we could kind of allot as circumstances come up or get applied to. I just, like I said, it's a careful dance. I don't think that we should have people on the commission that know nothing of anything, like any of this kind of, information, but I also don't want to overwhelm them, and I don't think that people need to be absolute experts on this. I think the reason why that we're asking people to come from a variety of backgrounds is to bring their personal history and to see like what common folk would suggest happen in given accountability circumstances. I don't think that we're asking commissioners to be experts on any of these things. I don't know if that's best practice, Cami. If you could, I know you said 20 to 30 hours. Like I said, this just still seems like a lot more than that. So I'm trying to figure that out.
Well, so if I can, I think that there are ways that you can work to balance having the training that makes commissioners feel like they're prepared for the work, and the fact that we're trying to pull together a diverse group of the community with different circumstances that may allow or disallow them to participate this much. And some of those ways could look like training that lasts throughout the year, that it's not one huge chunk. Or I've worked with groups where there is a training at the beginning of every regularly scheduled meeting. So over the course of the year, they've got, I mean, there's 12 hours right there. There's also a way for them, in the first year, a lot of times, most of what a board does is just training, so that then they can get ready for everything that's coming after that. So there are some different ways to look at it, and there's different ways that boards handle it. I will say, I just watched a board do 30 hours of training, and that's just one part of their training, all in one chunk, and it just about broke them. So I do think that it is something that has to be spread out and very thoughtful of the circumstances of the entire board and how, as you're kind of developing it. Gabe?
Thank you. And I think Rich brings up a really, really important point about expectations of the board members. I think I've brought this up in the past. We have put in a lot more work than I think we had anticipated. And I don't know that it's sustainable over 2 terms to expect people to do the amount of work that we've done. But that's the important part of having the support for the board. So if it's that auditor monitor or what have you, to kind of help provide context for meetings prior to and staff reports and other ways. But I think another really important consideration that we'll discuss a little bit later is compensation, and making sure that the review board members are compensated for things like training, so that if they are, it makes it far more accessible for people who aren't of the economic status that they could do this as a volunteer gig, that we are actually able to get perspectives from a broader range of people than we probably are used to at the city of Santa Barbara. So that's one consideration too that I'm thinking about, and I just want to thank Rich for highlighting that. Unrelated to this section, I wanted to make a suggestion that we've been going for a little bit now, that after this section, maybe we take a little bit of a break and go on recess so everyone gets a little bit of a brain break.
Thank you for that, Gabe. Demo?
Yeah, just Gabe kind of touched on part of what I was going to say, because we discussed this in our subcommittee. But just as far as like the role that the auditor would play, I think they could if they're like a subject matter expert on policing issues, that could take a lot of weight off as far as like training procedure and all that stuff. Like they can do briefings before each case that apply to whatever the context of whatever case is coming up before the board. So yes, there's some trainings that are like really necessary, like sexual harassment and ethics and other things like that. But if it's things that are more like subject matter, there should be some sort of training, but that could be balanced against like a subject matter expert who can brief and do like little reports and kind of like guide the content. And then I just like I'm still of the opinion that ride-alongs there should be an opt-out option, but I'm just curious as to hear, maybe I'm just not understanding what exactly like the process is because I'm not visualizing it well. So maybe I'd just like to hear more about it and why the police department thinks it's like so necessary, because maybe I'm just not understanding or seeing some value that is there. So it doesn't have to be now, but at just some point I'd like to hear more about like why that's such a critical factor.
Absolutely. Lizzie?
So last month, I was able to attend the NACOL conference, and I learned so much, not just in the sessions, but in talking with people and hearing about their experience. And I met folks who either work or serve on commissions that meet once a month, that meet either weekly or twice a month, and then some that meet quarterly. And it's really dependent on what they are doing and how involved their review body is. The folks that I spoke with that were meeting weekly or twice a month, they were actively involved in the investigation. Like they were reading through all of the transcripts, and they also were part of really big cities with significant police events that required a lot more oversight because of, police involved shootings or whatever. And to Rich's point, one of the things that when I would ask them, like, what's one lesson that I should take away from this? Almost every single person said, scale the commission to the size and the needs of your city. Otherwise, you are not able to support what their needs are. And as Rich said, you set them up for failure because it becomes illegitimate and the community doesn't see the significance because the output is not matching the promise, essentially. So I think when we look at training, when we look at like how often the commission is going to meet, I think we really need to take into consideration what we're asking the commission to do, and does that match the needs and resources really of our community. I did attend one session where we walked through a case, an officer involved shooting, and I have to say it was impactful for me. And I was thinking, and I have, I work with SVPD in different capacities. And so I feel like I have a somewhat, positive experience now with police. And even then it was difficult to watch several, for a few reasons it was difficult. So I think it's really important that if we're asking our commissioners to listen or to read this content, they need to feel comfortable to at least do a ride along or at least do a walk along, because this is heavy. It could be heavy material.
Thank you, Lizzie. Rachel?
Yeah. Wow. I feel like everyone I've listened to talk, I now want to keep adding things I want to say to this. But the first thing I just wanted to bring up is, again, I've got my focus group, working group hat on. That like this is a really interesting section for me that I actually also would love to think we'd get a lot of community feedback on, but maybe not, right? Like unless we specifically call attention to this. So I kind of want to flag it, I guess, for that new working group and Cami to maybe like, we should think through this with like the facilitators of a focus group and like, is this section something where we can maybe get some community feedback on stuff like this? Right, because potentially those focus groups are stakeholders who might be interested in being on this oversight body at some point. And then following that, I also, this is really making me think that like part of this is, when we all leave this particular community formation commission and it becomes time for that oversight body, like I see so much opportunity for us there to be like, that's when like we really do get to see what our community wants and needs. Like what Lizzie was saying, right? That like this list should, other than obviously the required things, like there should be enough openness and space in this list of training so that the oversight body really feels like they can, make this list appropriate to an oversight body in Santa Barbara, rather than any other kind of, any other city. So I love that kind of framing of like, leaving space for this to be scaled to our community. And I'm not sure that's something we can specifically, drill into this section without making it too specific for that eventual body. And I do also just kind of want to comment because I've been struggling with this a lot on the commission of like, there are times when I feel like I'm a staunch defender of like creating a safe enough space so that this can be an inclusive and accessible body. And I still think that's incredibly important. But I am pretty struck by, the balance of that, of like, yes, we need to make it as safe and structured and supported as possible with things like stipends and accessibility. And then also recognize that this is going to be a lot of work. And I think the people who would apply to be on this commission recognize that. And if they feel like they're going to be supported and compensated in an appropriate way, that it's okay that it's that much training, right? Like we've gone through a lot and it was a little more maybe than what we thought we signed up for. But we're all adults and that's like what we signed up for. So I feel like, right, like what we can do in this document is just structured enough that, if these recommendations all get accepted, that's, maybe this is a special different commission also in the amount of work people put into it. And that would be something we can be transparent about to build trust with the community, but not, I guess, worry too much about, what this might mean for particular individuals that may or may not ever want to be on this oversight body. And I also just, I want to address too, like, so this, ride-alongs and the walk-alongs and this practical experience, like, I also just want to say, that's a section that I've actually been very eager to engage in this year. And COVID hasn't made that possible very often, because I really feel like for me, I don't have any history of trauma where I think these experiences would be triggering for me in a way that they would be. And I do think that they're incredibly valuable for the kind of empathy that I would think we'd like to see in commissioners, right? People that would be on this oversight body. So I feel like I'd hesitate to make them absolutely mandatory every year in every circumstance, but I kind of want to push back a little bit. And Demo, you probably weren't asking me to weigh in, like it's probably law enforcement that you want to hear from on that. But I see,
Good to hear from you.
I see a lot of value in that, right? And part of that is because in my own experience on this commission, I've been wanting some of those experiences. There's some I don't want, but there certainly are. And that's because I recognize that there's a big gap for me in my understanding of the occupation of a law enforcement officer. So yeah, I will stop there. Sorry, that was a lot of talking. But
Thank you, Rachel. Demo?
Yeah, I definitely am. I'm very, I've learned to gain a lot of empathy, and I realize that that's really important to this job. I was with the ride along specifically. I remember mentioning this a while back. There's just like, other ways that you can learn about it. I just feel like I don't understand why there's just the specific like mode, you know. It's just, I mean, I'm not saying it's not a good thing. I just don't understand. Like, I just want to understand why, like specifically, like what comes out of it that you can't, like, I think I like, just like when I read like a lot of cases, because I'm in law school, I read a lot of case history of like incidents of police. Like, I feel like I learn a lot from that, or maybe if I read the policies and procedures. So I just feel like it's just like a very specific thing. And I just want to understand why. I'm not against it. I just don't think I've been like, there's been enough of an explanation of why that specifically is important. And I think it's good to hear. So I'm not like, you know, I'm pretty neutral on that. And just, I agree with both your points, Lizzie and Rachel, about scaling. And I think we should definitely consider incidence rates of like those things that come up, and just try to envision how often a board based on historical like incidents in the city, how like much work they'd be doing to try to make sure like we have the right number of people based on historical trends, at least to do our best to give them the right amount to handle that. So, yeah.
Thank you very much for that. And I just want to jump in as someone who served on a board and who was required to do ride-alongs. I personally found them, so as someone who had to do them, I found them very helpful because I was able to see what it looked like from an officer's perspective going from call to call. I was able to see how members in different areas of, or members of the community in different areas of the city responded to police. I was able to actually see some of the behavior that I saw in complaints, which actually kind of helped validate some things for me. And then also helped me understand some of the policy and procedure. Now, from an oversight trainer and someone who helps put these kind of things together, I've also found that, and I think I've said this to you all maybe a million times, so I apologize for saying it one more time, is that when a board or a mechanism is put into place, it's really important that it is not necessarily for police or for community, that the people who are serving in it are for the process. And so if someone has a feeling that they are uncomfortable being anywhere in a confined space with law enforcement, having to watch video, make decisions, and be completely unbiased in their decision making may be difficult. I'm not saying it's impossible, but that's something to consider. So those are some of the reasons that from a board member perspective, why it's helpful to do the ride-alongs and have that interaction with officers. It also helps build relationships too. By the way, they realize that oversight board members don't have fangs and they aren't horrible people, that they're there just serving the community as well. But then it also helps to continue the education process, and also helps you just see things from a fuller perspective, in my opinion. Sean?
Hey, thank you. If I could just really briefly respond to Commissioner Adam Williams' question, and then offer obviously to meet for coffee and talk it at length. But one perspective that is often not captured when we're talking about ride-alongs is that and often with many different professions, we have a translational barrier. In other words, what policy says on paper and how it can be practiced or is implemented in the field, there's a disconnect. And if for a commission or a board that's going to be recommending policy and procedure, it might be very valuable to see how there may be barriers between translation from policy to implementation in the field. So that's just one perspective that sometimes is valuable in this conversation. Thanks.
Thank you, Sean. Louisa?
Thank you. So this is a piece that I've been thinking about a lot. I've actually had the chance to speak with Sean and other members of law enforcement about this very specific issue. I am a behavior specialist in my world, and part of my job is to think outside of the box and to try and come up with ways to get at the things that I heard you say, that I heard people saying, is building connections, looking at policies and procedures as they're set and as they happen in reality. looking for people who are for the process, all of those types of things. While I personally would love to go on ride-alongs in this position, we have not had that opportunity. And I still feel that my interactions that I've had with law enforcement, that I've learned through this process, I have learned a significant amount, and I'm able to make decisions that are as unbiased as possible. I don't think anybody can be unbiased, to be quite honest, but to be as unbiased as possible. And I have challenges with the idea of them being mandatory. I do believe that there are ways, and I have asked Sean, and I know the team has asked Sean to come up with a list of alternatives to be able to see and to have those experiences that are similar to ride-alongs, walk-alongs, whatever it might be. I do absolutely see the value in them, and I want them to be an option. I do worry about them being mandatory. But again, I have really enjoyed my experiences getting to know law enforcement, and I very much look forward to doing ride-alongs when they are possible. And but that mandatory piece is hard for me, and I want to make sure that that's heard.
Thank you for that, Louisa. Anybody else would like to add any more comments to this section?
Yeah, I was just gonna say I appreciated Sean's explanation, and I just wanted to hear that just because the whole mandatory thing, I was just figuring out there must be like some like, like what is the reason for that? So I mean, I think I'm still with Louisa a little bit about the mandatory. I'm still a little iffy on that, but I do think the rationale makes sense. So I understand that. It's just a matter of like whether or not it should be mandatory, but there's definitely value based on what I've heard.
Thank you. Rachel?
Yeah, I just want to throw out really quickly, like this is, I really feel like I want to find a way to like work this somehow into like our focus groups or something. Cause like, right, like we also,
I agree.
oversight is about building trust between the community and law enforcement. And I think it's also maybe the part we're missing is also, we want the community to trust this oversight body. And I feel like, so the training, like that's something, if we can, the new working group and Cammie, you can help us, remember this or something, is like, if we can find a way to maybe like get more feedback from the community on this piece, like I'd be really curious if like the community has opinions about whether or not other community members, citizens engaged in police oversight, like what should be their level of practical experience, especially if we are also including a section that precludes law enforcement or former law enforcement from serving, right? Like, so that's part of trust building too. So I'm just going to file that away for the focus group discussion too.
Thank you, Rachel. Lizzie?
I noticed that the Citizens Academy isn't on this list, and a lot of this is included in the Citizens Academy, so maybe that's why, but I think that might be a nice option to add.
Thank you, Rach. I'm sorry, Lizzie. Thank you, Lizzie. So from the comments that I've heard, would it be fair to say that this is something, if we're going specifically to number 6, the ride-alongs, that to leave it as is now, and that additional feedback will be gathered from the focus groups and the survey, and then revisited after additional information is in hand? Is everyone comfortable with that? Anyone not comfortable with that? Okay, perfect. Before we take our break, I just want to make sure if there isn't anything else that any of the commissioners, John or you, Sean, want to add to the training section.
Nothing for me, thank you.
Nothing for me, Cammie, either.
Thank you. Okay, then I will hand it over to you, Gabe, for however you want to handle the break.
Okay, thank you. Let's take a 12-minute break, if that sounds good with everyone. And so we'll come back at 7:50 Pacific Standard Time.
Okay, and just to warn the commission, since I'm like running it from my phone, the recording is still going to be present. So open, careful on the microphone and everything else. So best idea to shut the cameras off and mics, and we'll come back in 12 minutes.
Sounds great.
Thank
See
you,
you
everyone.
all. John, are you there?
Yes, Gabe, I'm here. Ready to start?
Yep.
Okay, we'll just continue. Meeting's now back in session. We're on the agenda item number, I believe it's 7.
8.
8, thank you. Question number 8. Okay, we can resume.
All right, so we're going to call it back to order at 7:52. We are going to continue our discussion on the review board draft language. And Cami, we will turn it over to you.
Thank you, everyone. So the next section that we're going to talk about is the duties and authorities section. And so like the previous one, this is a long list of duties and authorities, and I'd like to kind of try to go through them individually so that we can get feedback on those you have feedback on. If all of you feel comfortable with it, then we'll just continue to move through the list. So with that, I want to start with number 1, which is making policy recommendations. That breaks down into these 2 sections. In collaboration with the Director of Police Oversight, the board shall make recommendations regarding policies, practices, and procedures of the Santa Barbara Police Department. And then the second subsection, the chief of the Santa Barbara Police Department shall be required to respond to the recommendations in writing no later than 30 business days from the delivery of the recommendations. I'll open up for any comments.
I'm just curious if Chief Malakian feels like that's a reasonable amount of time.
Chief?
Mr. Rodriguez, thank you. I was trying to find my video button. I certainly have no concerns about the chief being required to respond, but 30 days, to put the specific number of 30 days is restrictive and is likely to not be possible in all circumstances. And I would suggest there's probably some alternative languages, either mutually agreed upon time frame, something on that order, but not as specific as 30 days.
Chief, if I may ask, is there a specific time definite or a length of time for response that you feel is more appropriate?
The challenge, I think, is that it's going to depend on the nature of the policy. There may be, for example, we're in the process right now of revamping almost 24 policies based on legal changes that went into effect as of January 1st. This is an ongoing process, and I think one of the, particularly in the legal environment we're in, policy change and policy review is likely to be a big part of this board's work. So figuring out how to do that. And I'd be open to trying to help with some language so that the board would not feel like they were being deliberately delayed. But it is 30 days is not always practical.
So is your concern, because when I read this, to respond to a recommendation is much different than to implement a recommendation. Is your concern about implementation or the response?
It's the response. The implementation is presumably falls in a sort of a separate arena. But for example, if I am looking at some of the other agencies, if I sent the board a list of 24 policy recommendations or 24 legal changes that required changes to policy, and the board, directed me to respond or expected me to respond, which presumably they would, it wouldn't happen in 30 days. Trying to figure out how we're going to word it, try to working through the city attorney process. 30 days is just very quick. It's quicker than people think it is.
Right. And my response, my question for you is, what is a more appropriate time? Because I'll share with you a concern that I have is if we don't put a time on it, then there's the chance of, I don't believe that you would do this, Chief Malekian, but we don't know who the chief will be in 10 or 15 years. And I would hate for a recommendation to be made and there's no agreed upon time frame for a response and the board doesn't get a response. So my question is there a more appropriate time frame that you think would provide enough time for a response, even if it's far greater than 30 days, but so that the board does get a response?
So I always hate doing these kind of things off the top of my head, but I would change 30 days to 60 days. And I would add a sentence that says that the chief may request additional time if appropriate, or if necessary, or however we word it.
Thank you for that, Chief. That's very helpful.
The other Chair Escobedo, Commission, Police Chief Malekian, the other thing is you can mirror, and this kind of goes to what the chief was saying, Public Records Act requests, right? We have a duty when we receive one to respond to the requester in 10 days initially to let them know, our response to it. And then if it's voluminous, like let's say the request is something that can be responded to quickly, it can be done within that 10 days, but sometimes it may be 3 or 4 months, depending on the request. So I think having something like the chief says, at least in there, the response time to the commission of within a certain period of when anticipated it'll be done, right? Because it's in a case-by-case basis of the request. So the Public Records Act request process is a good example of that, right? It gives a mandatory duty for a city to respond or a public agency to respond in 10 days. But the request to provide the records is a reasonable time, and it depends on the reasonableness of the request. So just a thought.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Rachel?
Yeah, that actually preempts one of my questions, because I was going to ask, is there any other place where this kind of language appears? So I think that's really useful to sort of use that comparison of like records requests or something like that. Because my question was actually more, what does respond mean? Right? Because like acknowledging receipt of something should be pretty quick. Like that should easily, right? Just like the example John just gave us, reasonable to think, acknowledging something within 10 days. And then I actually liked the chief's language, like a mutually agreed upon, right? Like then we don't actually lock ourselves into any number. But I don't know, I'm curious what other people think about that. Like, is respond too vague of a term? Like, right? Like, should there be a 2 parts of like receipt of acknowledgement and then upon receipt of acknowledgements or acknowledgement of receipt is when that mutually agreed upon conversation happens about timing? Is that too in the weeds for this? The word respond just seemed kind of vague, especially then as we dove into the timing.
Lizzie?
So at the conference, it was highly recommended that a time frame is included, and the mutually agreed upon time seems fair to me. So I would opt for that. But I think we want to be clear that it's not a receipt, a confirmation of receipt of recommendations. This is like a dialogue that's taking place. So if I'm understanding correctly, the recommendations or the discussion would be initiated during one of the oversight body meetings. The review board would be there, the chief would be there, and the director of the oversight department would be there. So it would be clear that everybody received the recommendations. But the idea would be that the chief would then respond to, and it could be anything from policy recommendations to a feedback on a investigation that has taken place. So, and what I had heard from other folks is that without having that time frame in there, when there are cases where there isn't a collaborative relationship, those recommendations could just be moot.
Gabe? Oh, I'm sorry, Chief.
I'd be interested to hear from the chief.
One of the things I've seen in other jurisdictions I've worked is that there's, to Commissioner Johnson's question, is the initial response, and this again, if you to subsection Roman numeral I, is its recommendations regarding policy, practice, and procedure. So it's different than cases or discipline or whatever. It's policy, practice, and procedure. And the initial response is whether or not the police chief and therefore the department concurs with the recommendation or doesn't concur with the recommendation. And presumably if the chief doesn't concur with the recommendation, there'll be some language articulating the reasons for that disagreement. And I was looking at, I think it was Berkeley earlier this week, and they had a whole process in there for a back and forth where there's disagreement between the board and the police chief. So I think if as long as there's some language in there about that, and that the chief's response at the very least has to indicate whether or not they're in agreement or disagreement, and then presumably part of the initial startup phase of the board will be to hammer out these protocols about how these kind of issues get resolved.
Thank you for that, Chief. Gabe?
Thank you. Yeah, so thanks for adding that, Chief Malekian, because that was my understanding as well, is that it would be whether or not the chief and the department agree with the recommendation, and that would be included in the response. I have some concerns about the words mutually agreed upon amount of time, because then my question comes, what happens when there is not an agreement on the amount of time? What if the amount of time requested is far longer than what the board deems is reasonable? I think John's solution is a pretty elegant one of using the Freedom of Information Act. But again, my issue is just that the board does get a response to the recommendations in a timely manner, whatever that looks like. So I just wanted to air that, or throw out that concern with the mutually agreed upon time language.
And the language that the chief threw out about requests for additional time, that's fairly common. And so there are definitely examples of language that we could go to kind of show how that could work for you. Any other comments? Okay. Can any of you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, there we go. Sorry, it paused for some reason. I apologize. Okay, so the next section is involvement of the hiring and firing hiring or firing of the director of police oversight. The COB shall be involved in the hiring, firing process of the director of police oversight, which is the current working title for the monitor. Comments? Lizzie?
My only question is, does this fit within HR practices, either if they're an employee or if they're a contractor? How would that look? Imagine the review body, somebody from the review body would be on the interviewing panel, so that's part of the hiring process, but the firing process, I'm not sure how that fits in legally. So maybe John can help us with
Sure,
that.
I was going to weigh in that, Commissioner Rodriguez, Chair Escobedo, Commission. That is more of my concern too. It all depends on whether this is an employee or a contracted position. If it's contracted, obviously it's easier in terms of, putting it out for bid review, the commission being part of the interview of different candidates, and picking who they want to serve in that position. I shouldn't say bid, but just, putting it out of position. Now, hiring wouldn't be as problematic either as an interview panel, commission giving input. Firing is though, right? We have, even if this is an at-will position, how does that look like? How do you deal with that when you deal with satisfaction? How do you review performance? And also the concern of, retaliation. Let's say, let's say, for example, auditor monitor has a different viewpoint and the commission disagrees, but the auditor monitor or whoever may be this position views it retaliatory, right? Saying that I'm following the law and I'm losing my job because I'm not coming up with a recommendation. So it brings a whole host of problems, that can go down that rabbit hole. So firing does present a problem if it's an employee in terms of a body deciding that, versus, a human resources or department and evaluating that fairly. So it is problematic in the termination part versus, hiring that employee is different. Consider an interview panel. That's why it makes contracting, at least makes it easier in terms of renewing that or not. So just my thoughts and suggestions on that.
Thank you for that, John.
So I wonder if we want to change the wording to hiring and evaluation of.
So essentially combining 2 and 3.
I'm curious what others think about that.
I mean, that seems like a reasonable combination. Like I do think of that whole HR process as kind of one continuous thing that I would think that the board would in some way be involved in each of those steps. So, an evaluation is a nice broad term that could imply any number of things like annual review. And if it came to something like firing or replacement and
Any additional comments? Is there anyone that would feel strongly about not combining those two?
Well, I think they're both separate functions, very distinct functions, actually. One is like evaluating the effectiveness, right? Which is like, are we getting what we need from this person? And usually the way I've seen that emphasized in other ordinances is through like an annual report on the effectiveness or something to that effect. And then the other one is just the actual like hiring and firing, which is I don't think we're suggesting here, or my understanding of this is that the COB would not be, it would not be at their sole discretion, but that they would be involved.
Well, one way that could be at least accomplished is if all employees have yearly evaluations, and if there is a person tasked in the city department to basically supervise the employee, they can get input from the paper evaluations and possibly talk to the commission in a closed session setting about the performance evaluation, and do that there, and at least get input. But the sole discretion of that would still have to be with the through the HR process and the supervisor, if it would be an employee. But at least that way, when you allow the commission to be part of the evaluations and get input, allow the employee who's supervising that to hear it, that's one way for the commission at least to be involved in that process.
And Christian, I would say I agree with you that they're two very distinct processes, but I think that when the ordinance is written, they will definitely fall into different subheadings so that they can be outlined. But would it be okay to keep them as one in the recommendations?
That's a good point. That's a good point about recommendations versus this isn't the actual ordinance. So thank you.
Okay, any other comments? Okay. So let's move down to 4, which is request data related to SBPD pattern and practice. The COB shall have the ability to direct the Director of Police Oversight to collect data or information relevant to SBPD practices. The data shall be presented during a public COB meeting. Any comments? Okay. Rachel?
This is more a general question because I'm going to channel Anna here and ask, just because this is the first time where we've actually had something that references like a public consumption of something that's like produced. Do we like in the recommendations, did we make something general at the beginning about language justice, just like about the fact that like the assumption that any of these things presented would be made accessible, or like, is that something we want to have baked into each of the sections, or is that something we can have kind of as an overarching assumption? Right, because I feel like, we've mentioned that and thanked Anna for always like bringing us back to that, and that's something I think this commission's tried to do really well, even if we don't get it done as quickly, and so I want that to stick, I guess, throughout the recommendations. So this just made me think of that. Like, obviously, I don't know what data, presentations would look like, but yeah, just a thought to keep that in mind where we should put that in the recommendations.
Thank you for that, Rachel. Christian?
Just really quick, a lot of the other ordinances that I've seen will do something like outline policies and procedure for the board itself, which I think would be probably like the overarching section that you were alluding to. As far as I know, we don't have that, but we could add that to this if we thought it was appropriate.
Thanks for that, Christian. Any additional comments? Sean, I haven't asked you for a moment. I apologize. Any comments?
Thank you. This section is hard for me to take a position on because of the lack of specificity of data. I'm not really sure what type of data we're talking about. And one of the reasons I bring that up is because if we're talking about public display of information, there are a lot of legal implications there. So I would suggest that maybe there's a consideration to include a little more specificity on what this data might entail.
I think that's a good point. Gabe?
Yeah, I was just gonna follow up on that comment. And Cami, have you seen it in any other recommendations or other ordinances that can guide how we can specify it? Or would it also be appropriate to just add where legally allowed? Or we have that language in other places of the recommendation for the public meeting portion?
Yeah, I think a lot of the ordinances that you'll see add the kind of that disclaimer at the end, that you can see all of it as long as you're legally able to see it, and that it can be presented in a public forum or format. So, but I can pull some examples and see if I can find anything different than that might help out in this section.
And if I may, Sean, does that get to the heart? Would that get to the heart of your concern? And I ask that because I'm always conscientious of being overly prescriptive. So if we try and identify all the different types of data in this recommendation or in the ordinance, we might leave something out. So would you be more supportive of, or would it address your concern if we added some language about the legality of the information presented at a meeting?
I think that's partial. That addresses part of my concern, is that the confidentiality issue that we might run into depending on the data. But I also think there may be space, at least, again, thanks for asking my opinion. There may be space to at least have some general categories so we can visualize what we're talking about. Not necessarily a full list or anything like that, certainly not, but perhaps a little guidance on what type of data that is of most interest for this process might be helpful, and I might be able to provide a little more feedback.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Christian?
Yeah, I would just pile on here and say, like, usually the way that language is used in other ordinances is like in accordance with the law, with existing law, right? Or which, I think we're operating under the assumption that the board will be following all laws, right? That the board will not be conducting illegal behavior. So that would be the assumption, I think. And John has pointed out some areas where we're maybe being overly prescriptive, because I think that it's the kind of a given that we're going to follow the law. But I do think if we're saying the data shall be presented, it would be really good to add that in there, because if it's going to be presented, then it needs to be in accordance with POBAR and all of the relevant law.
Thank you, Christian. Lizzie?
So my assumption in this is that the data that we would be seeking would be for auditor monitor purposes and for public. And then any investigative data that we're interested in, that would not be for public, that would be in closed session only. So would it satisfy the commission and PD if we added that part in, to have the ability to collect data and information relevant to the auditor monitor functions?
Anyone have thoughts on that?
Commissioner Rodriguez, I'm not sure if I was supposed to respond to that, but I think that gets to some of the point, or at least some of my initial concerns. So thank you for the response.
I apologize. I'm just making sure I'm getting all of this down. Any other comments on this section? Okay, and so just to kind of recap, I think that this is going to go back to the working group to work on some additional language that makes this a little bit more clear, adds that language about in accordance with law, and also the additional language that you had mentioned just now, Lizzie. So, okay, if everyone's good with that, let's move on to 5, review the complaint process. The board shall have the ability to accept direct complaints, anonymous complaints, third-party complaints, and all other complaints. The board shall also conduct a review of the effectiveness of the current complaint process. Lizzie?
This might fall under all other complaints, but it was requested in conversations with PD. Some officers requested that there's an anonymous internal complaint process.
Mm-hmm.
So if we can include that as well.
Thank you, Lizzie. Rachel?
Yeah, I just had a suggestion for the second sentence, just similar to sort of the annual review of training. Some language in that second sentence that it would not just a singular review of the current complaint process, but that's like an ongoing activity to continually kind of look at complaint processes over the years.
Thank you, Rachel. Any additional comments or response or reaction to the ones that have been made?
This is John. My only question is, I think there needs to be some specificity, just to protect the commission and to also inform the public. Like California Penal Code 832.5 requires a department to, and which we have, is to establish a procedure to, investigate complaints and how that's available. So I guess A, this would have to be included in that, but B, how is the complaint? Is it to the commission? Is it to a website? Is it to an individual commission member? And don't forget, once we receive a complaint, if it's going to be part of that process, there's a duty, where does it go from there? Because there's a duty then, if it's intake, to investigate it. So it's a, we're putting on a unique mandatory duty for a commissioner or commissioners to fulfill. So it's just a reminder of just the importance in what we're doing in that process and all that. So I think if it's going to be there, there has to be a specificity of how that process is going to be done, how the complaint can be, where the complaint can go, and then the duty of the commission then to provide it to investigate it, because we have to follow the penal code section on that.
Thank you for that, John. And I think I can maybe pull some examples of how that looks in some other cities, particularly California cities. Christian?
It might be helpful to have like definitions as well in the recommendations about like what constitutes a complaint, right? And I know I've noticed some of the other ordinances have that, and they actually spell out like complaint is an oral or written communication to the office of the police monitor or the police department alleging misconduct. And it also, in just that one example, it seems like in the Boulder ordinance that they have those filtered through the auditor monitor, and then they're shared with the board. So it might be like Mr. Doimus had explained, it might be good to have like a landing place for those to where it can connect with the existing process as required by law.
Okay, thank you for that, Christian. Lizzie?
I think adding, I thought I saw it appear somewhere, but adding that this body has the duty to develop and publish the complaint process. So all of that will be spelled out, not necessarily in our recommendations, but once it's formed, a complaint process must be outlined and published. And Yeah, that's it.
Thank you. Chief?
I just wanted to add, and I think the point that Commissioner Rodriguez made about developing that process subsequent to the ordinance is a critical one. One of the things that, and I've said from the beginning, I think one of the primary missions of this board is to receive complaints from people who aren't comfortable going to the police department to do it. But at the same time, unless it's a particularly egregious situation and we'd have to define sort of what that looked like, my assumption based on our months of conversation is that that complaint would be turned over to professional standards with a direction to report back to the board about findings and what was done. And while I don't think we're going to spell all that out tonight, I do think some language about what that process actually looks like is going to be pretty critical for everybody's credibility.
Thank you for that, Chief. Christian?
Yeah, and I agree with that input. I think that ultimately too, though, and just the importance of this complaint process, right? I think that in the interest of continuously improving this process, even in the short time that we've been doing this, we have identified this body, right? This is not our job to like look at the complaint process. We've identified some issues with the current complaint process. There's certain access issues through the web portal that we were able to bring to Lieutenant Hill's attention. And so I think having a board like this looking at accessibility, is this working for people, like having people be able to easily submit complaints is not necessarily a bad thing, right? Like yeah, I think that it's really important piece of the board's duties to build that trust and transparency in the process.
Thank you, Christian. Any other comments on this section? Okay, let's move on to the next, section 6, closed session. The board will meet in closed session. I'm sorry, Sean, I did not ask if you had a comment on that last one.
That's okay, thank you. The only consideration I might ask or recommend is operationalize what an effective process is, just so everybody's clear. And that may be done in a preamble, but perhaps there's a little bit of language that can be included here about what is an effective process.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, so closed session, the board will meet in closed session when discussing or reviewing the details of or case files of open or closed complaint investigations to the extent permitted by law. Open that up for comments. Christian?
Sorry, I don't want to belabor conversation on this, but we thought it was important to add this, to give the board the ability to comply with the law. But again, like I believe that this is covered by existing law, and the board would be complying with the Brown Act, and all matters where closed sessions are required to comply with laws on the books. So I'd love to hear from Mr. Doimus on if this is duplicative or just a good thing to have in here to emphasize that the board is committed to safeguarding sensitive documents and what have you.
Sure. Thank you, Chair Escobedo, Commissioner Alonso. The Brown Act has really four main areas where it can go into closed session, and one related to here is discussing personnel matters, but this is a little bit outside of that. This is one where I kind of want to get back to the commission on if, because I understand the nature of going through personnel files and going through investigation details, but it may be one that we're not permitted to go into a closed session on. If it's just a case file or an investigation, that may need to be done in open session. I don't know if Cammy's had experiences in other commissions in California or not. So I don't know if it would fit into one of the really exclusive categories of the Brown Act to allow for it or not. I will certainly get back to the commission on this one.
And John, I think that I said that I would do this before and I haven't. There are a couple of directors who have ways that they operate that I think would be helpful, because from the conversations we've had, I was a little confused how they're able to operate in certain ways. And so maybe I can help set up some conversations as you're doing that research to see how that is happening in other cities in California specifically.
That would be really helpful. Yeah, because I want to make sure we're compliant, and it sounds like other cities have done it. I just don't know exactly how they got there, because what category would fit under.
Okay, perfect. Lizzie?
I'm just kind of wondering if the personnel or the investigative review is done in a work group that's not a quorum, and then that group just presents recommendations, then that can be done in closed, or at least not in public view.
Thank you for that, Lizzie. Gabe?
So I want to be conscientious of time. We are at the 3-hour mark, and we have a few substantive issues on the review element portion. So I know my brain is starting to check out a little bit, so I can imagine I'm not the only one. I wanted to float an idea out with the commission and gauge interest. We're at the part where we're so close to finishing our draft recommendation. I'm curious to know if the commission is open to having a meeting next Wednesday in addition to our meeting in 2 weeks, to where the drafting group can massage this language with the feedback, and we can come back with the changes, hopefully get through and approve this. Maybe we'll have the auditor monitor portion to start next week. And then we can finish it out in 2 weeks at that meeting. And then when we have our draft recommendation, then it's on to basically our outreach, and we're gonna not have these marathon meetings. So are there any thoughts about that? How do people feel about that? I hope after seeing what we have now that we feel like we're getting close, because I can tell you we are getting close.
Are the folks on the subcommittee confident they'd be able to make the changes by next Wednesday?
Yes, I think we could make the changes relatively easily. But I also would just want to gauge the interest of the committee to finish this work tonight and do the marathon meeting now, so we don't have to do an additional meeting, give people, a week of space to then start the work on the following Wednesday. I don't. Maybe this is more work than we thought, but we all knew it was going to be work, right? So maybe I would just propose that we power through tonight on finishing the review of the powers and duties, if people are open to it.
Rachel?
Yeah, well, that was just gonna be my question is like, sorry, I wasn't clear on like what we're proposing, like finish going through the last 4 pages, right? Of this draft. But then for next week's meeting, if we did the additional meeting, we could potentially also finish this up and start the auditor monitor review of that draft.
That would be the hope. I would imagine that tonight, my original proposal was we pause, because I can tell you that something like the very next topic that we're going to discuss, subpoenas, is going to be a substantive one that we're probably going to have some discussion on. And we're about halfway through the powers and duties, and then we need to talk about stipends. So my suggestion was we take a pause. The drafting group will take the feedback that we've received, implement it into the draft, come back next week to just finish out this draft with the changes and the feedback that we've received tonight. And hopefully, we need to check in with the auditor monitor group, but maybe we can start the auditor monitor discussion and finish it out in 2 weeks.
So if that's the case, like, yes, I feel like the going through the first part of this one was good because it was sort of like stuff that all felt familiar. We remembered our discussions on it. And then when we got to this new stuff, it definitely got longer and more involved conversation, right? So I think we can assume that the auditor monitor draft is going to be more similar to this latter part because we didn't have as much discussion on that. So I mean, because of what this was like tonight, if we don't add a meeting next week, I guess I'm thinking that 2 weeks from now we'll be in the same place, like not having time to finish up the auditor monitor piece. So I mean, I don't know. I feel like I'm kind of leaning toward having next week's to finish this up and then start the other piece. But that would also be like, how does the auditor monitor work group feel about would they actually have a draft for us by next week? Because if they wouldn't, then that's, yeah, changes the conversation on next week.
Lissy?
I personally, I can do either. I drank coffee before this meeting, so I'm ready to go. But I'm also thinking that if we do table this until next week, can we all make a commitment that we are going to read this document and make notes on this document so that we can come back next week prepared to give our input and then move into the next section, because we really want to get this done this month, and we are really great at discussing, and I love that. I love our dynamic conversations, and I know for myself, I apologize, I didn't read this document before today's meeting, and I think that we might be able to save time if we all came prepared.
Thank you, Lizzie. So, as the one facilitating the conversation, I can tell that I'm losing some of you in the conversation. And I think I have to say, some of these things are really important and they require a lot of voices and a lot of thought. And I just don't want to lose some of that just for the sake of pushing through for another hour and a half. Because if you want to get through all of that, that's realistically what you're looking at this point.
I would agree with that. I think that pushing through doesn't mean we'll get quality decisions tonight. So I am comfortable with tabling this until next week. I think we all knew that January was going to be a big push. So I'm prepared to do that as long as everyone else is.
Who is, I just want to yes, to Lizzie's point about also just like arriving next week prepared. So in order to be prepared for that, like when we already have this document, but would we have the auditor monitor piece in time to also spend some time with that before next Wednesday's meeting? Because forgive me, I forget what that who that working group is.
That's Seraphine, myself, and Lewis, and Cami. So we would have to schedule a meeting Friday or Monday or Tuesday. Preferably Monday, so that we can spend time Tuesday cleaning up the document.
Just FYI, Monday is a holiday.
That doesn't mean we don't work.
I know, I was just throwing it out there.
So it feels like everyone is okay with concluding tonight's meeting, coming very prepared next Wednesday to, at a minimum, finish the review, because it will not just be going through the rest of this, it will also be backing up and looking at the changes that working group has made to the discussions we've already had. And so it will be a very full meeting as is. And then if we're able to add in the auditor monitor section discussion and begin that, all the better.
Yeah, and just, I mean, to, I guess, yeah, further underscore how great that would be for the new focus group, right? Preparing for the focus groups and the survey, to have at least this piece wrapped up, so that then we can go back to the survey, kind of make those questions a little more specific, which was always the goal of getting this draft done to do that. And CCI, who's going to work with Cami and Nicole on the facilitation guide for the focus groups, like the sooner they have that draft, they need lead time then between when we conclude that and when they're ready for the focus group. So it's all in service of February being more manageable as well.
And I know that the auditor monitor group is somewhat small. So I don't know if they want additional members to kind of help out, but I know sometimes coordinating schedules is hard and finding a time, but we're at the point where we really need people in the work group that are going to make time and can push through. So if there is a need for that, please just let us know. All right. So John, can you open up public comment for this item before we entertain a motion?
Sure, Chair Sabato. Is there any members of the public that wish to speak on this item? Please raise your hand. And Sean, let me know if there's anyone raising their hand. You have 3 minutes to speak.
There are no attendees logged on right now.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Sean. We can close
the same idea we did. Okay. So is there a motion to table this until next week, next Wednesday?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
Well, then do we need the motion to reconvene next Wednesday as well, to make sure that folks are agreeing to a meeting next Wednesday, the 19th, January 19th?
Rachel, are you open to amending your motion?
Yes. Okay. So the motion amended would be to, yes, schedule a meeting for next Wednesday, the 19th, so that we can table this discussion now and continue it.
And I'll agree to second that.
Perfect. I'm not seeing any discussion. John, can we do a roll call vote, please?
Yes, we can. 1 second. I was just freaking in my head. We can do it within the noticing requirements. The notice would have to go out soon. So would it be just this one item for the next meeting? Besides our general future business or Everything else?
We might be going over the auditor monitor language as well.
Okay, okay, all right, so I'll put that in motion. All right, I'll do a roll call vote. Commissioner Adam Malikan,
Yes.
Commissioner Sander,
Yes.
Commissioner Alonso,
Aye.
Vice Chair Zepeda,
Yes.
Commissioner Chavez,
Yes.
Chair Escobedo, Commissioner Wood,
Yes.
Commissioner Kim Johnson,
Yes.
Commissioner Rachel Johnson,
Yes.
Commissioner Killebrew,
Yes.
Commissioner Rodriguez,
Yes.
and I don't think Commissioner Renaud made it, so that's it. Motion
All right.
passes.
All right. So with that, we'll close out item 8 and we will move on to item 9, future business. The future business we have is we're meeting next week to do exactly what we just said. I don't have any other updates or future business.
I had something that I wanted to bring up for future business. So since for February, I wanted to see if we could have like an acknowledgement or maybe like just reserve a small space because it's a Black History Month. So just like acknowledging, like, again, reaffirming why we're here and like how this commission came to be. So having like space provided for that. And so I wanted to bring it up to the commission if that's something y'all would like to do.
Sounds great. Thank you, Anna. And just so folks know, I've been actually convening for the last couple of years a council of Black community, Black-led organizations. And we've been planning every year a calendar of events for Black History Month. And so that will be launched after MLK weekend. So keep an eye out for that. That includes a county resolution and different city resolutions as well. So I'll share that with this group because we'll be meeting lots. So that's great.
Yes, please. All right. Anything else from anyone? Okay. Well, that concludes item 9 and our meeting. Thank you all for a really productive meeting. It was really fruitful, and I hope you can see the light at the end of the tunnel. I do.
Yeah, this is amazing, you guys. Thank you for all of the work that you did tonight.
Thanks,
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cami.
Thank you.
Bye, all.